having had Easter and then looked a couple of weeks ago at Jesus' post-resurrection appearance to Thomas, figured today would be a good chance for us to explore the significance of the way in which the resurrected Jesus leaves this world, at least in a physical sense, through his ascension into heaven. And although it's a pretty crucial part of the whole Jesus story, what's interesting is that Matthew's gospel doesn't mention it, John's gospel doesn't mention it, and the original ending of Mark's gospel that we have before a later additional ending was added, Mark doesn't include it either. Well, 3 out of 4 gospels, we don't exactly have a kind of satisfactory conclusion to what happened to the physically resurrected Jesus after his time here on earth. Indeed, it's only Luke who fills us in, both in his gospel and then in his sequel to his gospel, the book of Acts. So without Luke and his writings, who knows what stories and rumours might have developed, crazy conspiracy theories or sightings of an elusive Jesus perhaps popping up here and there. Could have been like a cross between sort of Lord Luke and the Loch Ness Monster, and those stories of Elvis. He never really died and he was working in a chip shop in Bolton or something like that. Who knows where we'd be without Luke. But the good news is, instead we do have what happened to Jesus at the end of his time here on earth. And here's a clip of his gospel. It's Luke chapter 24, verses 50 to 54.
When he had led them out to the vicinity of Bethany, he lifted up his hands and blessed them. While he was blessing them, he left them and was taken up into heaven. Then they worshipped him and returned to Jerusalem with great joy. They stayed continually at the temple, praising God.
There we go, pretty short but sweet version. In his recap that Luke then gives in the book of Acts, he adds a bit more detail, telling us that after Jesus said this, he was taken up before their very eyes and a cloud hid him from their sight. But that's it, really. It's a relatively few words for such a big event, a pretty brief and basic account of how Jesus physically left this world. Kind of now you see me, now you don't, an elevation, if you like, up into the sky before clouds hid him from view. And then he was gone, taken back, we're told, into heaven. Which, if we're honest, I think this kind of idea of a Jesus floating up into the clouds, it's a pretty strange story, isn't it? Really, almost like a kind of helium balloon just going slowly out of sight. And for some people, this kind of strangeness of the story, it can add to their skepticism that Jesus was ever physically resurrected at all. They think dead people don't rise from the grave, and living bodies don't just ascend into the sky. So perhaps they'd argue instead that maybe Jesus remained dead after all, after his crucifixion. Perhaps his corpse was stolen and disposed of by his disciples to trick people into the fact that he'd been resurrected. And then they made up this ascension story as a convenient way of concluding the story, which might sound a little bit credible perhaps, until we start questioning how the disciples might have managed to steal Jesus' body from a guarded tomb, why no one ever broke ranks and exposed their deception, and most of all, why would so many of Jesus' disciples end up giving their lives defending the reality of Jesus' resurrection if they knew it was all built on a lie? Now, in the case of Jesus' resurrection and his ascension, as strange and as incredible as it is, I'd suggest we're looking at something that actually happened, because in this instance, it seems truth is indeed stranger than fiction. What's more, not once did the disciples, who, let's not forget, had all met the resurrected Jesus, not once did they go looking for Jesus after his ascension. No, they accepted, they believed, they knew that he'd gone before their very eyes. Now, of course, as we know, and space travel tells us, heaven is not up there in the big blue sky, we're on the clouds. But I suspect in much the same way that the resurrected Jesus seemed able to appear in locked rooms and so on, so his physical body could disappear perhaps in much the same way. I don't know how you imagine the ascension happening. I kind of, remember Star Trek and that Beam Me Up Scotty kind of thing, when the body kind of just fizzled and dissolved and went off. I kind of imagine it a bit like that in this cloud somewhere. Who knows how it actually happened? But all the evidence would point to the fact that Jesus' physical departure from this world was a real and decisive event. But if you notice, although I've been consistently saying that it was Jesus' physical body and his physical presence that left us, the good news, indeed the best news in all this, is that Jesus is still very much with us, not in a physical sense, but through his Spirit. Indeed, that's why I think at the end of Matthew's gospel, although Matthew, as I said, he doesn't describe Jesus' ascension, he does share these final words of Jesus, who says, "Surely I am with you always, to the very end of the age." The end of the age is like to the end of this time before heaven and earth are ultimately joined and Jesus returns in person, in other words. Surely, he says, emphasizing the truth of this, surely I am with you always. Which is pretty mind-blowing, I think. The same Jesus who healed the sick, raised the dead, fed the hungry, walked on water, championed the poor, challenged injustice, lived, died, and rose again. This same Jesus is here with us now by his Spirit. No wonder Jesus chose to ascend back to heaven, because he knew that that was the best way to enable each of us, just like these first disciples, to enable everyone the world over to have the chance to live a Jesus-focused, Spirit-filled life where we are, in our place, in our time, in our own way. Indeed, following Jesus' ascension, in a few weeks' time, we're going to celebrate Pentecost, the occasion when the Spirit of God, Spirit of Jesus, descended on all the people. Jesus' body ascended. The Spirit, it seems, descended on the people. A presence which we too now enjoy in our lives. So we'll continue to explore the significance of the Spirit with us in the weeks to come. But for now, for today, thinking about the ascension of Jesus, I want to leave us with one quote from a guy called Tim Keller, who's a writer and pastor. When he puts it like this, he said, "The ascension is not the absence of Christ. It's the increased and heightened presence of Christ." Increased and heightened, because that's what's here with us now. Jesus by his Spirit. It's how God is here with us. And so my prayer, I think, is that we be able to grasp afresh and be encouraged by the wonder of this life-shaping, life-enhancing, life-giving truth as we worship Jesus as the one who was and is to come.